Mosaic, a daily news program from WorldLink TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Following their Friday prayers, thousands of Turks demonstrated in protest of their government's decision to join the war against Iraq. They also rejected plans to establish a Kurdish state in northern Iraq. Now to Mohammed Al-Abbasi in Istanbul.
The National Security Council discussed the significance of the Kurdish threats to Turkey's army in the event they enter northern Iraq. Turkey is engaging in a political and national debate over threats by parliament members not to vote in support of their government's request.
Washington says that Iraq's decision to destroy the Al-Samud missile is deceptive, and Blix considers it a crucial step towards disarmament. Madrid and London want a new Security Council resolution to prepare for a war on Iraq. Russia threatens to use its veto power against any new UN resolution on Iraq.
Russia will use its right to veto if that's what is necessary to maintain peace and stability in the world.
In preparation for the Arab summit tomorrow, the United Arab Emirates presents a plan to diplomatically solve the Iraqi crisis. Arab foreign ministers prepare the final draft for their ending statement amidst contradictory opinions on Iraq.
"15 heads of state, as well as the other senior representatives from the 22-member Arab League, will meet on Saturday at the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh to discuss mainly the Iraqi crisis, but also the 29-month Israeli-Palestinian conflict." Now TV's Nihal Saad is in Sharm el-Sheikh, and she filed in the following report.
With the backdrop of a growing threat of war against Iraq, Arab leaders are converging here in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh in a summit that is hoped to succeed in forging a common Arab vision on Iraq.
Well, we hope we can take a unified and a practical stand against war through compliance by Iraq. I think nobody is under any illusion that the chances of avoiding war are great. At the same time, it is very important that we keep trying until the last minute, and that we do so not just by issuing communiques, but by trying to find mechanisms through which we can try to find a political way out of this crisis.
According to Arab League Secretary General Amr Moussa, the Arabs will devise a mechanism, not merely a statement, on how to implement the resolutions emanating from the Arab summit. The Arab foreign ministers meeting in Cairo last month revealed sharp divisions among Arab countries, revolving basically on how to deal with the Iraqi crisis.
What are your expectations to come out of this summit, given the differences among the foreign ministers in their meeting in Cairo more than a week ago?
Whatever the differences, I think we are all agreed on the necessity to avoid war and to ensure the implementation and the respect of Resolution 1441. So I expect that we will come out with a common position that reaffirms these basic principles on which there are no disagreements at all.
After their intensive meeting here that continued until very late Thursday night, the foreign ministers agreed on the agenda of talks in the summit. 3 main topics will be discussed. 1, the threat of war on Iraq. Related to that issue is the situation between Iraq and Kuwait. And 3rd, the Palestinian issue. Some Arab countries submitted a number of proposals on how to accelerate joint Arab action. Saudi Arabia put on the table a working paper outlining how to reform the Arab position. The Saudis' initiative entails forging mechanisms on how to implement the Arab Summit resolutions and how to support the Palestinians and implementation of the Arab initiative agreed upon in Beirut last year. The initiative also proposes political reforms within the Arab regimes. The Palestinian issue will be one of the main topics on the agenda of the Arab leaders.
President Mubarak earlier on said that the Palestinian issue is the crux of the Arab-Israeli conflict. He said that it's more difficult than all other problems. Do you find that the summit here is giving it the due attention?
Yes, I mean the Arab foreign ministers meeting now, preparing for the summit, approved unanimously the Palestinian requirements in the draft resolution on Palestine. There is a consensus here that this is the crux of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and therefore it's the crux of any need to protect Arab security interest and any move towards ending the threats against the Arab people and the Palestinian people in particular. I hope that this resolution will be passed by the summit, and I hope the summit will add a new modality to make sure that it is implemented.
Arab foreign ministers in their meetings on Thursday appointed a 9-member committee along with Arab League Secretary General Amr Moussa to draft a final resolution for the summit here. The ministers rejected a draft resolution that expressed without specifying Iraq absolute aggression against any Arab country.
Sir, let me start by asking you a question about this summit. The Arabs are gathering here. They gathered more than a week ago in Cairo. They had so many differences. Do you believe they can form a unified stand this time?
Yes, I do.
So what are your expectations? What is it that Iraq expects out of the summit?
Well, what I expect that all Arab countries are in a position that any military aggression which could start on Iraq would extend its consequences to the rest of the region. And the object of this aggression on Iraq is not entirely confined to Iraq as such, but as well it will be a beginning for redrawing the map of Arab region and Arab countries. And therefore, all Arab countries are in the dilemma of this threat. Yesterday we have discussed the consequences of this possible military attack on Iraq in terms of trade, economic activities on Arab countries. And we found that there will be a grave consequences on Arab countries, Arab people, and Arab economy if any military aggression started on Iraq.
The foreign ministers rejected the U.S. Secretary of State's call for them to urge Saddam Hussein to step down and get out of the way and let some responsible leadership take over in Baghdad. Powell. 3 points of view divide the Arab League, according to the Arab diplomats. One camp, which includes Kuwait, argues that war is inevitable and the region should focus on dealing with the aftermath. A second camp includes Egypt and Saudi Arabia, which argue that war can be avoided if Iraq cooperates with UN weapons inspectors. The third camp, led by Syria, wants Arabs to rally around Iraq and produce a summit declaration opposed to war. This urgent Arab summit comes in response to President Hosni Mubarak's call for Arab leaders to promptly meet and to try to forge a unified vision and a common Arab stand toward the Iraqi crisis and the Palestinian question.
Look, the situation is very critical and very serious at the same time. I have discussed this with so many leaders, with Saudi Arabia, in United Emirates, in Kuwait, with Libya, with other countries. I think we came to the conclusion that there should be an emergency summit, which I concluded today, just to us to discuss and unify our ideas towards this. It's very important and very vital.
Said that there is still a window of opportunity to avert and avoid war in Iraq. Do you still believe there is still this chance to avoid war?
There is a big window. If the parts could respond positively to the request. But this should take place according to the Security Council resolutions.
What can the Arabs do exactly? There is a split within Europe regarding a war in Iraq. There is the France, Germany, Belgium and Russia's camp, and there is the other camp, which is the U.S. camp, and and the Britain camp. What can the Arabs do, and what is the Arabs' position regarding this divide regarding the Iraq?
I hope that the Arabs could drop all the differences now. We are in a very serious situation. I hope that they could unify their ideas and come out with one conclusion, one decision, which may have great effect on the situation.
The Arab Summit will begin Saturday noon with 17 Arab leaders attending. These include Bahrain, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Morocco, Yemen, Libya, Tunisia, Sudan, Somalia, Algiers, Qatar, Djibouti, and the Comoros Islands. In addition to the representatives of 7 other countries comprising Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Palestine, the Sultanate of Oman, and Mauritania.
In the words of President Mubarak, it's time the Arabs should have one voice, strong and resonant enough to be heard and respected. And that's what this Arab Summit is all about. It remains to be seen, however, whether or not the Arabs will end up in acrimony as much as unity.
The world remains divided between those who support war and those who oppose it. Thus, no notable change in position at the Security Council. The American president carried on with his campaign against the Iraqi president. He asserted that his country will lead a coalition to disarm Iraq. However, Russia says it may use its veto power at the Security Council.
The conflict continues at the Security Council between those who support peace and those who support a war against Iraq. President Bush reiterated that the United States will lead a coalition to disarm Iraq, adding that Washington's allies and friends are obligated to seek a new Security Council resolution. Bush also said that war is the last option. However, Americans fully understand that the United States may go to war with Iraq soon. Bush's remarks coincide with the diplomatic efforts conducted by his allies and his opponents. In China, one of the Security Council's permanent members, Russian Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov and his Chinese counterpart, Tang Jiangshuan, rejected any military solution. They believe that the Iraqi crisis should be resolved diplomatically, even if it means that they need to use their veto power at the Security Council.
Russia will not support a resolution which will directly or indirectly solve the Iraqi crisis through force. Russia will use its right to veto if that's what is necessary to maintain peace and stability in the world.
فإن روسيا ستستخدم حقها في النقد. أوضح أن بلاده ستفكر في أمر صدور.
The Russian foreign minister added that his country will think about another Security Council resolution if it is needed to support the United Nations inspections in Iraq. Meanwhile, Jiangshuan warned that a war will cause instability in the Persian Gulf and the entire world, adding that it will lead to a human catastrophe and it would also have a negative impact on the world's economies. In Spain's capital, the support for war increased. British Prime Minister Tony Blair and his Spanish counterpart Jose Maria Aznar, who are 2 of the United States' strongest allies, support a new Security Council resolution on Iraq, which will allow the use of force on Baghdad. Blair expressed his confidence that Washington, London, and Madrid's draft resolution will receive the support of other council members. Meanwhile, Blair rejected Iraq's decision to begin destroying the Al-Samud II missiles, saying that it is not the time for games. He stressed that Saddam Hussein does not make any sacrifices unless threatened by force. Aznar, however, feels that the Iraqi president is playing with the feelings of millions of people who are calling for peace. Meanwhile, Australian Prime Minister John Howard believes that the war is more of a possibility now, despite Iraq's promises to get rid of Al-Samud II missiles. Howard, whose government supports the United States policies on Iraq, feels that the Iraqi decision is not in full compliance with the Security Council resolution.
that is likely to maintain the divisions between the pro and the anti-war camp in the UN Security Council. Iraq on Thursday has accepted in principle to destroy its Al-Samud 2 missiles upon the request of Chief UN Weapons Inspector Hans Blix before the March 1 deadline. But Washington was quick to undermine the Iraqi concession, with US President George W. Bush saying, quote, "We will disarm him now," unquote. Though war now seems inevitable, Iraq has accepted in principle to destroy its Al-Samud 2 missiles upon the request of Chief UN Weapons Inspector Hans Blix, whose office received a letter with the Iraqi decision. Blix gave Baghdad a March 1 deadline to start the destruction of these missiles considered as banned for exceeding the 150-kilometer range limit set by a UN resolution. Iraq has insisted that the rockets do not breach the range limits, but needed to make the decision so as not to give a pretext for a US-led attack and maintain the support of the anti-war camp inside the UN Security Council, though such a move may considerably weaken its defense capabilities vis-à-vis the approaching war. Meanwhile, Blix's chief deputy arrived in Baghdad to discuss the pace of Iraq's destruction of its Al-Samud 2 missiles, while UN inspectors on Thursday returned to a pit near the town of Al-Aziziyah, 100 kilometers of Baghdad. The site was opened by Iraq in an effort to prove that it destroyed R-400 bombs containing biological weapons there in 1991. The inspectors took samples from metal fragments at the site to check whether they did come from destroyed biological weapons. South African disarmament experts visiting Iraq said they were convinced Iraq was doing its best to disarm.
We fully support the demand that the Security Council should extend the work of the inspectors, because clearly it's working. And if it's working, why stop it? Why don't we give it a chance to complete its task so that we can finally have satisfaction that all weapons of mass destruction have been dealt with?
The answer to these questions lies within the White House, where US President George W. Bush was now busy planning for war and a post-Saddam Hussein Iraq, after he clearly said inspections were of no use and that the discussion about the Al-Samud is part of Saddam's campaign of deception. Bush said, quote, "We will disarm him now," unquote. US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was also quick to say that the destruction of the missiles would not be proof of cooperation. A 3-day-month update on the work of inspectors by Blix is likely to serve Washington's war policy. A diplomat who saw the draft quoted it as saying that Iraq's disarmament efforts have been very limited so far, and that, quote, "Iraq could have made greater efforts to find proscribed items or credible evidence showing the absence of such items," unquote. Nevertheless, the anti-war camp in the Security Council maintains there is progress in inspections and war should be avoided. As the United States stands ready for war with Iraq, the buildup in the Persian Gulf continues to grow steadily and could approach more than 200,000. Meanwhile, Turkey has dealt a blow to US preparations for war against Iraq by delaying further until the weekend a key parliamentary vote on deployment of thousands of US troops on Turkish soil.
The U.S. military buildup for war topped 200,000 troops in the Gulf region on Thursday, while inside Iraq, Saddam Hussein was said to be moving some of his best-trained forces into new positions. Moreover, major new U.S. deployments were ordered Thursday. U.S. first B-2 stealth bombers have been ordered to deploy for potential combat operations, according to a spokesman at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. With a payload of 162,000-pound satellite-guided bombs and an ability to fly virtually undetected through enemy radar, the bombers are considered a weapon of choice for the opening attacks of an air war against Iraq. The U.S. Navy said a 6th aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, has been ordered to leave California for the Gulf next week, with 5 other vessels in its battle group. The Nimitz will join 3 other carrier groups already in the Gulf, the USS Abraham Lincoln, the USS Constellation, and the USS Kitty Hawk. The USS Harry Truman and the USS Theodore Roosevelt are in the eastern Mediterranean in striking range of Iraq. Meanwhile, Turkey's ruling party on Thursday delayed a crucial vote on allowing in US troops, as the government failed to persuade its lawmakers to back the deployment. And despite the delay of the vote until Saturday, preparations for a possible arrival of US troops continued in the Turkish port of Oskar and in nearby Mersin. Only hours before the move to delay a vote, Turkish and US officials sealed a deal on military cooperation, which among other things would clarify the role in any war of the Turkish military in largely Kurdish-ruled northern Iraq. In Hungary, a group of Iraqi exiles are undergoing US Army training to prepare for volunteer duty as guides, translators and guards in case of a war against Iraq.
Anti-war activities continued in Italy, one of Washington's main allies in the standoff with Iraq. During the past few days, peace activists were trying to prevent U.S. military material from arriving at Camp Darby, the U.S. military base located in the Italian city of Tuscany. Hundreds of people opposed to a war against Iraq have been protesting at railway stations in northern Italy, and the latest demonstrations against the transport of U.S. military equipment across the country. Some 300 activists flocked to the town of Grisinano di Zocco near Vicenza, a departure point for trains carrying U.S. military equipment from northern Italy to Camp Darby, the U.S. military base near Pisa in Tuscany.
This is the main target of this today manifestation. I mean that we want to give our little contribution against something which is done against the willing of our people, against the feeling of our people.
On Wednesday, demonstrators marched in Pisa near the destination of the U.S. equipment, while about a half-dozen protesters invaded a nearby military airport, hanging a peace banner before being led out by authorities. The next day, protesters tried to keep the materials from arriving at Camp Darby. Some 1,500 police forces have been deployed to step up security at train stations where protesters may rally. Meanwhile, Italian parliamentarians, including Green Party parliamentarian Paolo Cento, entered the Darby camp to conduct a weapons inspection. They told journalists that they found depleted uranium shells and tactical missiles.
We saw depleted uranium shells and tactical missiles. We asked how they got here, and they were transported by trucks and by boats, therefore via water and land. According to a prerogative of the constitution of our country, we have requested a secret meeting in Parliament with the Prime Minister, the Interior Minister and the Defense Minister, because we have to understand what is happening on national territory.
Still on the Iraqi issue, the United Nations World Food Programme in Rome said on Thursday that it has begun to prepare for any humanitarian crisis in Iraq that could be caused by a military attack. The WFP said that it expects that it be confronted with the nutritional demands of between 5 million and 10 million people if war breaks out in the region.
The United Nations World Food Programme in Rome said on Thursday that it has begun to prepare for any humanitarian crisis in Iraq that could be caused by a military attack. World Food Programme spokesperson Trevor Rowe said that the WFP has positioned enough food in neighboring countries to feed up to 900,000 people over a period of 10 weeks.
We anticipate, in terms of general planning, having to feed anywhere between 5 million people and 10 million people. But nobody knows for sure. This is really a stab in the dark. It's a situation that we will actually have to see as it evolves and then respond accordingly. Basically, you have a very good system of road networks in Iraq, so we will be moving food in by truck, primarily. Clearly, there's a possibility that bridges, road networks could be damaged, but we're confident that we can use trucks as long as it's safe to move.
The WFP is already in Iraq monitoring the distribution of food and other humanitarian goods through the Oil for Food program, the UN project created after UN sanctions were imposed that allow Iraq to sell its oil to buy food. Rowe also said that the United Nations estimates it has a 1-month supply of food in place in Iraq through the Oil for Food stocks, adding that the stockpiling of food in countries neighboring Iraq is to complement that. Moving contingency food stocks into Iraq itself would be politically difficult now, since Baghdad, not the United Nations, decides what food it buys through the Oil for Food program.
Turkey's parliament has voted to delay until Saturday a debate on a deal to allow the deployment of thousands of U.S. troops in a fresh blow to U.S. preparations for a possible war on Iraq. The ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, had called the vote after discussing the issue at a party meeting, but it remained unclear why the AKP wanted the delay. The United States is pressing for a quick discussion for a secondary northern front, which military experts say would take pressure off a possible main invasion force pushing to Baghdad from the south. Only hours before the vote to delay the debate, Turkish and U.S. officials sealed a deal on military cooperation, which, among other things, would clarify the role in any war of the Turkish military in largely Kurdish-ruled northern Iraq. Turkey plans to send up to 40,000 troops into a border buffer zone 20 kilometers inside Iraq. Meanwhile, Dutch-supplied Patriot missiles have been moved from the port of Iskenderun, and U.S. technicians have continued to upgrade the Turkish port of Mersin Tasuku. The Patriots, the first consignment promised by the Netherlands to Turkey under a bilateral agreement, are likely to be stationed close to air bases. Meanwhile, U.S. technicians have continued to upgrade the port of Mersin Tasuku. The port was opened for temporary use by NATO. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon asked Parliament to approve a new rightist cabinet likely to harden Israel's line on Middle East peace. Sharon's new government was formed after his rival Benjamin Netanyahu accepted a post he had earlier spurned. Ousted as foreign minister, Netanyahu agreed to Sharon's offer to become finance minister. Outgoing Finance Minister Sylvain Shalom, a Sharon ally, was named to take over the foreign ministry. Defense Minister Shaul Mofaz, a former army chief of staff who has backed Sharon's tough military policies against the Palestinian uprising for independence, will remain in his post. Likud has built a coalition with the centrist Shinu Party, the ultra-nationalist National Union, and the National Religious Party, a champion of Jewish settlements on occupied land. All four parties favor a hard line with the Palestinians, but the National Union Party, with 7 seats, takes the most extreme view. Some of its leaders advocate pushing Palestinians out of the West Bank and annexing the land to the Jewish state. With this coalition, Sharon now controls 68 seats in the 120-seat Knesset. The hawkish complexion of the new government was expected to add to obstacles facing international mediators seeking an end to nearly 2.5 years of Israeli-Palestinian violence. Palestinian Cabinet Minister Saeb Erekat said the new coalition will be a government of settlement activities and of more military escalations and incursions. And on the ground, Israeli troops thrust into Rafah refugee camp in the Gaza Strip and demolished 2 houses and damaged others. Israeli armor and bulldozers have rolled into the camp in the southern Gaza Strip, razing 2 houses and damaging several others. The troops also arrested 1 member of the Palestinian police force during the operation near the small Jewish settlement of Rafah Yam. Israeli military sources said the demolished buildings were not inhabited and had been used as small factories. Meanwhile, the Israeli army conducted a Patriot anti-missile launch drill at an army base just outside Tel Aviv. As the drill siren sounded, the Patriot crew ran to the battery and moved the missiles to a skyward angle in preparation of any incoming missile attack. An Israeli army officer said that after the September 11th terror attack in the United States, the Patriot battery had been moved from a position in the north of Israel in case a plane would try.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support provided by Henry and Virgilia Dakin.